Hello and welcome into the Addison to 35th podcast. My name is Ryan Herrera. I'll be your host for this Cubs episode of the Addison to 35th podcast. And I'm coming to you tonight, Thursday, July 31st. The trade deadline has come and gone. And a little bit of an uneasy feeling in Cubs land right now after that trade deadline. So, just to get into it right away, the Cubs made some trades, made some additions to the roster. In some ways, you can consider them upgrades to the roster, but these are the trades that the Cubs did end up making before the trade deadline hit. On Wednesday, they traded for right-handed pitcher, starter, potential swingman kind of guy, Michael Soroka from the Nationals. And in that trade, they sent back minor league outfielder Christian Franklin and minor league infielder Ronnie Cruz. They also that day traded for right-handed reliever Andrew Kittredge, something like that, from the Orioles, and received traded minor league infielder Wilfred De La Cruz, sent him to Baltimore. And then on Thursday, I want to say within the last hour to half hour before the trade deadline hit, they ended up making a trade acquiring Willie Castro from the Twins for minor league right-handed pitchers Ryan Gallagher, who I believe was the number 8 prospect in the system, according to Pipeline at the time. I went back and looked, and they had already been updated, so he wasn't there. But I want to say he was number 8 in the system. And another right-handed reliever in the minor leagues, Sam Armstrong. And to open up a spot on the 40-man roster for Willie Castro, Miguel Amaya was moved to the 60-day IL. Now that's not a setback or anything like that. He's been on the injured list for over 60 days now, so he's eligible to come off whenever. He's on a rehab assignment, but he had been on the 15-day IL, Amaya, for basically since he went on he was on the 15-day IL since he went on the IL. He's making rehab. He's playing in rehab games right now. So whenever he's available and ready and healthy and ready to rejoin the team, he can do so. He's just off the 40-man roster right now. That kind of just kicks the 40-man decision down the road a little bit. It allows the Cubs to not have to, DFA or just remove from the 40-man roster a currently healthy guy, a guy who can in some way contribute to the major league team. So nothing more than paperwork, a procedural move. I know there was some like people wondering on social media about it, like what does it mean? And that's what it is. It's just a procedural move, nothing big. And Miguel Amaya can and will rejoin the Cubs when he is healthy. Obviously, he'll have to be added back to the 40-man roster to come off the 60-day IL. So Cubs will have to make a decision then. But for now, that was the move to open up a 40-man spot for Willie Castro. And then the Cubs also traded for left-handed reliever Taylor Rogers from the Pirates, who had actually just acquired him from the Reds on Wednesday. And they also got cash. And in return, they traded away minor league outfielder Ivan Breathauer. I'm not even sure if that's how you spell or you say his name, but that is the that is a return for Taylor Rogers. Now, I won't pretend to be super knowledgeable about what some of these minor leaguers, who the minor leaguers are and what the Cubs are really giving up. Seems like they gave up some good pieces to get back pieces that can help their team right now. I know there was talk about Ronnie Cruz and an uneasy feeling about trading him away, and even Christian Franklin, who's at the upper levels of the minors. But it seems like guys that were either like a Christian Franklin wasn't going to really crack the Cubs roster anytime soon. He was, as far as organizational outfield depth chart, seemed lower on it and wasn't really in a position to join that big league team. And it was some of those guys, some guys that are still a little bit away from contributing, guys that are not highly rated in the Cubs system, stuff like that. So, I well, and I will talk about the corresponding move to open a spot for Taylor Rogers in a little bit, but you come away with that, and on the surface and on their own, like at the very least, they're fine, right? Like I think the Taylor Rogers move is fine. I don't know if he's necessarily, he's going to slot into high leverage innings for him, but he is another lefty. He's been in the league for a while and has put up good numbers. He's put up good numbers this year, so a solid addition to the bullpen. Another guy you can use in lefty matchups, and kind of we'll see where things go with that. Willie Castro. Well, Willie Castro was the one that when the Cubs didn't get Eugenio Suarez from the Diamondbacks. He ended up getting traded to the Mariners. But he ended up getting traded to the Mariners. That would have been a huge upgrade to the roster as far as the Cubs' offense is already really good. Eugenio Suarez putting together an elite offensive year would have really taken that lineup to another level, a higher level than what it's currently at. He has 36 home runs, right? Like he's been hitting the ball really well this year. And he's a rental bat, so it's not like you're committing to him super long term or anything. But he would have definitely been a good win now move for the team. Of course, the Cubs didn't get him. Willie Castro is another guy we'd heard and talked about in this space as far as another option for the Cubs to go out and get. Like Willie Castro is a switch hitter. He's a guy that he's a good pickup. He can play a bunch of different positions. He's a switch hitter, like I said, but he's been hitting lefties really well this year. I think it was a 131 WRC plus against lefties on Thursday, the day of the trade deadline. So he could be used in a super utility role, and that would obviously allow guys around the field to get days off here in the last 2 months. And I think one of the things with the Cubs is they've had such good health with their position player group. A lot of those guys have played most of the games. So getting a guy like Willie Castro who can move all around the field, who can be used in different lineups, different spots, that's valuable in itself as the utility man, super utility man that can go and spell guys, give guys a day or two off their feet and feel like you're not necessarily missing a whole lot with that. So I think that's the Cubs' best pickup in my eyes of what they did. It again when they weren't getting Eugenio Suarez anymore, felt like a guy that they could really use and a guy that could check off some boxes for them in just one player, and they went out and got him. As far as like Kittredge, I think he's a solid reliever. Definitely a solid reliever. Has put up some good numbers and been pretty consistent over the last few years. And it'll remain to be seen how Counsell uses him out of the bullpen. Like I don't expect him to supplant Palencia as a team closer, but it seems like from everything I've kind of read, like he's definitely an option in higher leverage spots. Maybe not the most higher leverage spots, but a guy that can be comfortable, a veteran guy can be comfortable in some higher leverage moments when given the chance. So, intrigued to see what he adds to that bullpen as far as another veteran arm that can potentially gain Craig Counsell's trust pretty quickly if things go right. And then obviously Michael Soroka, he was a name we'd heard, but obviously like feels more like a depth option there for the Cubs or a depth addition. I don't know. He doesn't have like ERA isn't super good this year. The expected ERA, some of his peripherals are good. The expected ERA is a lot better than what the ERA shows. I think the strikeout and walk numbers are fine. Like seems like an upside play there with the Cubs. I know Jed Hoyer I want to say it was on like Marquis, like Cubs Live or something, had said that they had actually looked at Soroka in the offseason and tried to get him, but didn't. And this was kind of the opportunity to actually bring him into the organization. So I think what Jed told reporters at Wrigley today is that he will slot into the rotation or is expected to slot into the rotation here as he joins the team. But obviously, Jameson Taillon and Javier Assad are closing in on returns here, potentially in the next couple of weeks, maybe a little bit longer. But I know Counsell had said maybe mid-May ish. So if that checks out, you're looking at a few starts where Soroka would take, and then you kind of figure out if he moves to the bullpen and is a swingman or a multi-inning guy for you, and figure out how the pieces fall into place then. But I mean, again, I think it's an upside play. I think there's underlying numbers there that I kind of listed that encourage you a little bit, and that maybe bringing him from the Nationals, a team that obviously was selling at the deadline, to a team in the Cubs that have a great defense, would put a great defense behind him, a good lineup to give him leads, stuff like that. Maybe that gets more out of him, and maybe putting him in the Cubs pitching infrastructure and just kind of seeing what Tommy Hotovy and the rest of the pitching group, Casey Jacobson, all those guys, seeing what they can potentially get out of him. It feels like an upside play, but it's definitely not. You're definitely not looking at a top of the rotation addition, which is kind of where I want to go with this. Again, as I said, I think overall the moves are fine. I think I think there's still like an underwhelming or a bit of an anticlimactic feeling to the Cubs and what they ended up doing at the trade deadline. I think the question is, did Jed and the Cubs front office, did they do enough to bolster this team and put them, maximize this season, put them in a position? Um, I think the main thing was, uh, I'll go back to the last winter when they acquired Kyle Tucker. That was a bold move to add a star bat, arguably the best bat, on the market there. I don't even know if he was technically on the market there. I don't remember exactly how that whole situation played out, but like definitely one of the best bats that was made available. And they pounced, didn't give up it wasn't cheap, right? Like Cam Smith, Isak Paredes, Hayden Wesneski. That's what Jed had to give up to acquire Kyle Tucker. But he was bold in making that move. And so far, I would say the move has worked out. Just didn't, I think at this trade deadline, it just didn't seem like Jed was willing to be that bold to make the additions that maybe it seemed like they needed to make. I, they held on to their top 100 prospects, and I get like, well, let me read this quote. This is what Jed Hoyer told reporters today about the starting pitching market. The way I would say it, very few rental starters, effectively no starters that had 1 year of control after this, and then the controllable starters, none of those guys changed hands. Obviously, we didn't acquire them, and no one else did either. The asking price we felt like was something that we couldn't do to the future. In the end, the asking price on those guys would have been so detrimental to our future that we decided against it. And I get all that. I get you see, from everything you heard over the last few days leading up to the trade deadline, it was that the starting pitching market is, or how the asking price was high. I mean, you see it when you see all the starters that didn't end up moving, right? Especially when you're talking about the guys with control. Sandy Alcantara and Edward Cabrera remain with the Marlins. Joe Ryan still with the Twins. Mitch Keller still with the Pirates. Like guys like that. I mean, even some of the other names, the Dylan Ceases didn't get moved. Zach Gallen didn't get moved. There were obviously Merrill Kelly did get traded to the Diamondbacks, but he also brought back three of this is what according to Steve Gilbert over at MLB.com. Brought back three of Texas's best pitching prospects, number 5 prospect, and number 9 prospect, and number 13 prospect in their system. I won't pretend to know. I won't pretend like I know too much about the Rangers system or how highly rated these guys were outside of just the Rangers organization, but seemed like a pretty solid price to pay for Merrill Kelly and what the Diamondbacks brought back for him. So even a rental arm like that brought a decent return. So I get not wanting to trade away a bunch of top 100 prospects, especially when so many of those guys are like right are big league ready almost in a sense. Like Moises Ballesteros is already up with the Cubs right now. Owen Casey and Kevin Alcantara are both on the 40 man and one call away if an injury hits and they need him. Like there's and then Jackson Wiggins is like another highly rated prospect. The Cubs think really highly of him in their system as far as pitching goes. Like I understand not wanting to part with some of those guys, but it just, again, I think there's an underwhelming feeling overall because I think one of the things, I don't remember who said it, but maybe it was I don't remember who said it, but someone had said that the Cubs are expected to be one of the most aggressive teams at the trade deadline. And to be fair, that can mean, leaving no stone unturned, really pushing to get guys. Doesn't mean you get them across the finish line because it takes two to tango, but being aggressive, pushing, calling, asking about everyone, like I can still understand if that's what the Cubs did. They just didn't come away with more. So I think overall the moves are fine on their own. There's just that underwhelming feeling, and definitely, I mean, you look at social media, look at Twitter or whatever, and Cubs fans are disappointed for sure in the results of the trade deadline. I think plenty are frustrated at what happened at the trade deadline, considering, I think you look at the position the Cubs have played themselves into. They're the second best team, tied for the second best record in Major League Baseball right now at the end of the trade deadline. A game behind the Brewers, obviously, in their division, but right there with the best records in baseball. I mentioned the Kyle Tucker trade. Well, he could be a free agent at the end of this year and could, move on. He could not be a Cub at the, in 2026, and that's it. So I think it felt like it was time to make a big swing if you're the Cubs. And in my opinion, it felt like it was time to make a big swing. I understand not trading top 100 prospects for rental pieces. I understand not trading, whatever package of top 100 prospects would have taken to acquire one of those controllable, higher profile, bigger name starting pitchers. Like I get the asking price was high, and that makes things tough. But on the other side, it was like I said, like Jed was in the offseason bold in getting the Tucker move, just didn't feel like he was willing to be as bold this trade deadline season to go out and get that, because we and it's not even just the starting pitcher. We kind of talked about like the bullpen, and they made some additions to the bullpen that could definitely help in the last 2 months of the season. But you're also looking at a closer in Daniel Palencia, who, while he's been fantastic for him in that role, he's never pitched under the bright lights of the postseason. Who knows how he'll fare there? And if knock on wood, I guess. But if underperformance happens or injury happens to a guy like Palencia, where do you turn as far as someone to close games? I think it made sense for the Cubs to go out and get a guy who can at the very least help carry some of that closer's load, that ninth inning load, that safe situation load, someone with experience in that role that can help Daniel Palencia out. And worst come not even worst comes to worst, but just there's the scenario where maybe that guy becomes your closer, right? They didn't do that. They didn't go and get a starting pitcher. Again, I get asking prices were probably high for a lot of the guys, and the Cubs weren't willing to give up their very top guys to get those deals done. But with the position the team had played themselves to, with Kyle Tucker being able to hit free agency and potentially walk after this year, it felt like the time to make a big swing or to take a big swing. And it felt like the roster, the players, the group, the coaches, it felt like the group as a whole kind of deserved that. They kind of deserve the front office to not be too worried about the future and trading away some of their best prospects will do for the future, because I think you look back or you think back to the Theo Epstein quote of what was it, opportunities to win are sacred, and this was very clearly an opportunity for the Cubs to win. And I think going into this season, I don't know how many people would have pegged the Cubs to be in the position they're in now at the trade deadline with 2 months of games left to play. I think if you would have told people then, obviously, I think Cubs fans would have been ecstatic about that, but also changes the expectations from make the playoffs to, okay, you've actually put yourself in a position to potentially make a World Series run, or take a real shot at it. Like maximize the potential of the season, take the big swing if you can. Like the opportunities to win are sacred. This is your opportunity to win. Go and do what you can to get it. And I get the Cubs front office isn't super like inclined to make all in moves. I get that, and there's definitely some risk in that and some irrationality in that, irrationality in that, as far as making all in moves, especially when your front office philosophy is kind of focus on winning while keeping an eye on the future. That's kind of Jed Hoyer in the front office's philosophy and MO. So it kind of fits into that MO or that ideology of what they ended up doing at the trade deadline. It's just, again, they are one game back of the best record in Major League Baseball. They have a solid lead in the wild card. They are lucky that the Brewers didn't make a ton of big moves either, but you're you're not leading the division anymore. Other NL contenders around you, like the Mets, Padres, and Phillies, were aggressive and made big moves to bolster their own team. It feels like the Cubs were unwilling, or I don't want to say they were unwilling to make the big swing. I think they were. They were definitely willing to make a big swing. They just weren't willing to go go meet high asking prices that we've heard that seem kind of outrageous in a way. And I think, when again looking at the starting pitcher market and seeing how many of those guys didn't end up getting moved, it seemed like, or it's not didn't seem like it, the Cubs were not the only team that was unwilling to meet those asking prices. 29 other teams for those kind of guys didn't get moved. 29 other teams weren't willing to meet the sky high asking prices that some teams were asking for. We don't know the exact figures or the exact players that they wanted back, but the fact that none of those guys got moved means no team was willing to go out and meet the asking price. So it's not just a Cubs thing, but it does, again, feel underwhelming, feels a little anticlimactic. It feels like the Cubs had an opportunity to really bolster and add and plug some holes in a group, and bring in some higher profile names to really upgrade and really enhance this team's ability and this team's potential, especially when you're looking at not just playoffs anymore, but potentially making a deep run and even a World Series run. Like that's to have even those kinds of goals and expectations now isn't unrealistic anymore with the way the Cubs have played so far this season. All that considered, I feel like I've talked about that a lot now. We've been going to over 20 minutes, and I feel like I keep coming back to the same point and talking in circles, but it overall just feels like a missed opportunity for the Cubs to do more. I like some of the pieces they did bring in, and I think overall this team is better now than it was a few days ago. But just it feels like a missed opportunity to do more, and that's a bummer when you're looking at what the position the Cubs roster played themselves into. I think they earned some big additions. I think they deserve that, a big swing like that. Cubs didn't do it, and now we wait and see what we wait and see if that comes back to hurt them later on in the season. I think they still have enough to make that playoff run to get into October and play postseason baseball. We'll see if the lack of that big swing, especially when you're talking about bringing in a no doubt playoff starter, we'll see if that comes back to hurt the Cubs in a couple months, because you look at what the Cubs have now, especially in that rotation. I'm not convinced that they have 3 or 4 playoff starters right now in that rotation. I think guys can step up and turn into that, or show you that they can be that, or gain some trust in that sense. But it would have been really nice for the Cubs to have added one of those guys that you can give the ball to in a playoff game without a second thought. So there's that. Again, overall, just feel like it feels like a missed opportunity to me. Feels underwhelming. Feels a little anticlimactic, and we'll see how this plays out for the Cubs moving forward, especially as they continue to try to make this playoff push. The Brewers aren't making it easy on them, but now they have what they have and are going to have to figure out how to make all that work if they want to make a deep run here. I didn't mention the corresponding move for the Taylor Rogers trade there to open up a 40-man spot for him, because that's my next segment, and that is Ryan Pressly being designated for assignment. The Ryan Pressly experiment is over. again, was DFA'd to make room on the 40-man roster for Taylor Rogers. Look, I liked I liked the Ryan Presley acquisition in the offseason. They got him in a trade from the Astros. I think they got some cash with it. And we're hoping he could work into the closer role. He had plenty of experience with that in Houston. I liked the addition at the time. I'll say that and say that I did. That was my thought process. I saw some of the metrics. I think the fastball velocity was just you know I actually don't remember if it declined from the previous year, but it was just over the years you'd seen the decline. And he wasn't a setup man after the Astros got Josh Hader, and so he was maybe a change of scenery kind of guy, a guy that with the closer experience that you could go in and put him in the closer role and felt like maybe he could help you lock down some games. Overall, he just didn't have it with the Cubs this season. That was the main thing. He just didn't have it with the Cubs this season as far as what they needed him to be. He had a 7.62 ERA through May 6th, which is that game against the Giants when he gave up 8 earned runs in the 11th inning. Just an awful performance there from him. And so, yeah, 7.62 ERA at that point, and then ended up not being in the closer's role anymore after that. He was taken out of that role, was used in more lower leverage spots, stuff like that. And he actually had a pretty nice run. He gave up no earned runs in his next 16 appearances after that, and no earned runs in 24 of his next 25 appearances after that, which went for a 0.77 ERA, which brought his season ERA down to 3.22. But I think at the same time, you still also kind of saw like you were concerned about it. I mean, the hard hit rate was bad. Um, the strikeout rate wasn't good. The whiff rate wasn't high. Wasn't getting a lot of chase. Average exit velocity was higher than you wanted it to be. Was below average with the walk rate. Just the metrics and the underlying numbers just didn't inspire a whole ton of confidence. Outside of the fact that he got a lot of ground balls, which is good when you have such a good defensive infield like the Cubs have. But they were just signs that you were concerned about, even when things were going well in the box score for him. And then, over his last 5 appearances, he had posted a 12.60 ERA. Don't remember how many earned runs that ended up being, maybe 7 or 8, something like that, over his last 5 appearances. But that included 4 home runs, which also includes a grand slam to Andrew Vaughn to break the game open. I believe that was on Tuesday, which is when Craig Counsell quickly went to the dugout phone and I got whoever it was up. I don't remember who it was in that game. That game kind of blew up in the Cubs' faces in a hurry, especially with that grand slam to Andrew Vaughn, which, side note, still not sure how he's doing it or what the Brewers figured out with him, what made it click with him. But he's been a big addition for them without Rhys Hoskins. So another big Brewers pull out of nowhere that has them leading the majors. I think I want to say still with the best record in the majors, definitely leading the National League Central by a game. But yeah, so side note over. The Cubs needed to improve the bullpen at this trade deadline. I think they did that with 2, maybe even 3 of the arms they brought in, and Ryan Presley just didn't have it. I mean, that bullpen had a 6 ERA in July, and I think that was 3rd in baseball. Ryan Presley just wasn't doing the job. He did have that stretch, a long stretch where I didn't even realize how few earned runs he was giving up during that stretch, but it still felt like there was traffic out there. He was walking guys, giving up hits. There were guys on base, and he was getting out of it, which is a credit to him in his own right. But like when you're making the traffic yourself, it's hard to give you too much credit. I don't know. I go back to I thought acquiring him and seeing if he could be your closer was a good move. Ultimately, it didn't turn out that way. Ultimately, didn't have it in this Cubs bullpen. He did fine in lower leverage innings, but when he was, I think, started getting back into some more higher leverage spots, just wasn't the pitcher the Cubs needed him to be. They brought in a couple new arms in Taylor Rogers and Andrew Kittredge, who should help bolster that bullpen. They have other options outside of Presley on that roster. Like a Caleb Thielbar is doing pretty well for himself. Brad Keller is doing pretty well for himself. I mentioned Daniel Palencia earlier, but like he's been a lockdown closer since he took over that job in mid-May. The experiment just didn't work out. And that's kind of as simple as you can put it. Is like they took they took a chance on Ryan Presley. It just didn't work out with him here, and it was time for him to go. And I guess we'll kind of see what happens as far as the DFA goes and where Ryan Presley ends up. But the Cubs cutting ties with Ryan Presley, getting him off the 40-man roster, seeing where that goes over the next few days, and especially when you look at the Chris Flexen DFA also a couple days ago, going to be a little bit of a new look bullpen for the Cubs now after the trade deadline. And we'll see what happens with Ryan Presley. Man, I think he was a good guy, a veteran guy. I think he was a good presence in that clubhouse. I think, especially with the bullpen guys, or in the bullpen, but especially with the younger bullpen guys, I think he was a helpful veteran to have around. But in a similar way to like Hector Neris kind of was that, or he definitely was that as well last year. He was a good veteran presence. I mean, hell, he came from the Astros too, a late inning guy from the Astros. And he was a good presence in that locker room. He was a good locker room leader. He was a guy for young bullpen arms to seek advice from, bounce ideas off of, and was good at that kind of stuff. He was a good presence there. But when it's not working out, it's not working out. And in a season like this, a season where every win is going to matter going down the stretch with how the Brewers have been playing, Ryan Presley just didn't fit into this bullpen anymore. And the Cubs made the decision to look at what upgrades they can make and feel like they made them. They feel like they made them, and that meant that Ryan Presley was expendable. So, good luck to Ryan Presley and whatever's next for him. If he stays in baseball, that'd be great. But he is, probably nearing the end of his career anyway. So we'll see what he decides, what options are out there for him. But you know, again, good luck to him, and we'll see what a little bit of a new look bullpen for the Cubs is able to do. My last thing here before I get out of here is remembering Ryne Sandberg. Died Monday at 65 years old. Had a battle with cancer over the last 2 years now, or a year and a half, 2 years, something along those lines. And that news broke Monday mid-game, maybe like the fifth or sixth inning, is what I remember seeing and seeing that news, and I'm just like, what the hell? What are you saying? Ryne Sandberg is dead. First of all, like, thoughts and prayers to his family and his friends. I know he has a lot of family meant everything to him, and that's something that when you look at his statue ceremony last year, like a lot of his, I think, part of his speech was saying like family, friends, love, like all that kind of stuff was of utmost importance to him, especially post playing career. Loved his wife, loved his family, loved his kids and grandkids, and that was super. That was a super big part of his life, and so rest in peace to Ryne Sandberg. Thoughts and prayers to his family. I know it's a difficult time, but it's also a difficult time in Cubs land. There's a whole generation of Cubs fans that grew up on WGN, right? Everyone got WGN around the country and grew up. There's so many Cubs, a whole generation of Cubs fans spread out across the country that became Cubs fans because of WGN, but definitely because of Ryne Sandberg and what he was able to do. I mean, you think about it: 10-time All-Star, 9-time Gold Glove, 7-time Silver Slugger, National League MVP in 1984. The Ryne Sandberg game on WGN. I want to say that was WGN's Game of the Week or something like that. Like, he was a star in this city. He was a star for the Cubs, one of the all-time great Cubs, of course. And he made a whole generation of Cubs fans. It's obviously well before my time as far as, potentially even growing up as a Cubs fan. Like Ryne Sandberg was playing well before I was born, but my dad was a kid in the '80s. My dad was a kid when Ryne Sandberg was at his best. When Ryne Sandberg was Ryne Sandberg, and uh, my parent he was my dad's favorite player. He still is my dad's favorite player. I think in any sport, and my parents didn't exactly name me after Ryne Sandberg, right? Like he's Ryan, I'm Ryan. Close enough though, but not exactly. But my dad still calls me Rhino. He calls me Rhino in kind of in honor of his favorite player of all time. So yeah, it's a sad day in Cubs land, not just because this all-time great Cub passed away, but a whole generation that idolized Ryne Sandberg for the way he played, the way he led that team, the class and honor that he showed. I mean, you hear people talk about him and the way he interacted with fans and teammates and friends and just anyone he kind of came across with a genuine good guy, genuine great guy with a great heart. And that's tough to lose in an organization that's so big and so widespread when you talk about across this country. To lose a hero in the organization is is just super sad. And like I said, it was a sad day in Wrigleyville, sad day for not just a whole generation of Cubs fans, but for Cubs fans anywhere. Um, I think I got to introduce myself to him once at spring training 23, maybe 2020, a couple years ago. I was able to introduce myself to him. Very brief interaction, but even then, making a few seconds to look me in the eye, shake my hand, nice to meet you. Like that was super cool, especially knowing that that was my dad's favorite player. So being able to tell my dad that I met Ryne Sandberg, that was a pretty cool thing. But again, everything you hear, he was just a heck of a guy and did a lot for again, loved his family, loved the fans, loved the teammates, loved his friends, like loved the Cubs. So yeah, it's a sad day. It was a sad. I mean, it's still sad. It was a sad day in Cubs land when that news broke. It's a sad day in the days since. I'm sure Friday there's going to be some kind of tribute to Ryne Sandberg. I believe Saturday the Cubs are going to be wearing jerseys with the number 23 on the back. I believe that's true. They'll also be wearing Sandberg patches on their jerseys for the rest of the year. So definitely a huge loss in the Cubs community. Um, yeah, and that's again like thoughts and prayers go out to his family, his friends, anyone that loved Rhino, anyone that was close to Rhino. It's a tough time, of course, but you also have the memories of all the things he did in his career and then getting inducted to the Hall of Fame and having his number 23 retired by the Cubs in '05. Got his statue last year on the 40th anniversary of the Sandberg game. Um, Definitely a sad thing, but leaves behind a lot of great memories for Cubs fans all over the world. So, yeah, well, rest in peace, Ryne Sandberg. Cubs land is going to miss you for sure. So before I get out of here, let me just give you the quick breakdown of what's coming up for the Cubs. They have 3 against Baltimore at home, followed by 3 against the Reds. They have Horton going up against Trevor Rogers on Friday, Matthew Boyd going up against Tomoyuki Sugano on Saturday, and then Colin Ray going on Sunday against a pitcher to be determined for the Orioles. So those are your next 3 this weekend. Then again, like I said, you'll have 3 against the Reds coming up to end the homestand, the post-deadline homestand. Look, it's going to be a long 2 months here, last 2 months of the season here for the Cubs, and definitely for Cubs fans as the Brewers just continue to make things not easy for the Cubs. But in the NL Central, Fangraphs still gives them the best chance to win the division and make the playoffs, with like the 8th or ninth highest odds to win the World Series overall. Still in a good spot here. It's just about winning games. It's about winning 2 out of 3 every time you can. Maybe sweep some series in there. The Orioles sold some pieces off, so maybe that helps. Maybe them getting worse helps the Cubs have a better chance at 2 out of 3 or even a sweep this weekend. Would be big for the Cubs if they can do that this weekend. But either way, Got to find a way to win a series and just overall stack up wins because you don't know what the Brewers are going to do. The only thing you can control when it comes to the Brewers is the 5 games you have coming up against them at Wrigley Field. Winner of that series wins the season series. So a massive series then coming up. I don't remember exactly when it is, to be honest, but that's coming up, I believe, this month. 5 games. Winner of that takes the season series. But that's all the Cubs can control when it comes to the Brewers. Those are the only games the Cubs face the Brewers left. That's all the only games they can control. With against them, what the Cubs can control now is winning games against whoever's in front of them. And right now, that's the Orioles. So it's should be at least on paper less of a test than it was even 24 hours ago. But um, it still comes down to the Cubs haven't necessarily been playing their best baseball. They just lost a series in Milwaukee. They lost, they were able to take 2 or 3 from the White Sox, but that was a struggle a little bit there. They lost a series at home to the Royals. They lost a series on the road to Minnesota before the All-Star break, a team that just sold off like 10 pieces from their 26-man roster. So not necessarily been the Cubs' best baseball as of late, but they got a chance here to start off the post-deadline stretch, the last home stretch of the season. Not home, but like the home stretch, right? The last stretch of the year going into the playoffs the last 2 months. They have a chance to start off on the right note here against the Orioles. So we'll see what happens when the Cubs restart. I say restart with quotes. Restart their season, or just going into August 1st. Get started on those last 2 months of the season, the last third or so of the season. We'll see what happens, and we'll see if the Cubs can kind of keep the train rolling despite the lack of a big swing at the trade deadline. That all remains to be seen. So until then, I'm Ryne Herrera for the Addison the 35th podcast. Thank you for your support, and we'll talk to you guys later. Have a good one.